I'm convinced Star Trek just introduced a better version of the Borg. Here's why. The Borg have long been Star Trek's ultimate nightmare, a collective of cybernetic organisms driven by the relentless mission to assimilate all life. They embody the franchise's darkest warning about the dangers of technological conformity and the loss of individuality. Ever since their chilling debut in Star Trek, The Next Generation's Who, the Borg have been the franchise's gold standard for villainy, a perfect fusion of horror and philosophy. But recently, Star Trek may have done the impossible, introduced a concept that rivals and arguably improves upon everything that made the Borg terrifying. With Star Trek, Discovery's final season exploring a new kind of connected intelligence and strange new worlds hinting at the ethical potential of shared consciousness, the franchise has evolved beyond the simplistic resistance is futile model. The newest iteration of a collective, whether biological, technological, or something entirely alien, may finally offer a version of the Borg that's not just scarier, but more complex, more thought-provoking, and more Trek. Let's break down why this new idea feels like the next step in the Borg's evolutionary story, and why it might redefine how Star Trek handles collective intelligence going forward. The Borg were always about fear. This new collective is about choice. The Borg's horror lay in their simplicity. They didn't kill their victims outright. They stole their selves. One moment, you were a proud starship captain or scientist. The next, your thoughts were swallowed by a chorus of mechanical obedience. In their time, the Borg were a perfect allegory for the anxieties of the late 20th century, the rise of technology, the loss of individuality in a digital world, and the fear that humanity would become obsolete. But the latest iterations of shared consciousness in modern Star Trek stories flip this concept on its head. Rather than being a force that strips individuality, they ask, what if joining a collective enhanced identity instead of erasing it? In Discovery's final season, the mysterious progenitor technology introduced an idea that felt distinctly post-Borg. The ancient creators of life in the galaxy left behind a tool capable of merging beings, not through mechanical assimilation, but through intentional, spiritual, and emotional connection. Similarly, Strange New Worlds' depiction of certain alien species like the serene consciousness shared by the Deleb in Season 2 challenges the assumption that unity equals submission. This new version of the collective makes the Borg look crude by comparison. Instead of a hive mind of control, we see a network built on consent, empathy, and shared purpose. Its evolution not through domination, but cooperation, the purest expression of what the Federation has always stood for. Star Trek has evolved beyond fear of technology. When the Borg first appeared in 1989, technology itself was the villain. The cybernetic implants, the mechanized voices, the cold green glow, all represented the anxiety of a culture on the brink of the computer age. But in 2025, that fear feels outdated. Technology is no longer just a threat, it's our daily reality. Star Trek's new take on collective intelligence acknowledges this. The next generation of Borg-like ideas in the franchise don't frame tech as inherently evil, but as a tool that reflects the values of its users. The Borg used it to dominate. The Federation, or beings like them, can use it to connect. This shift mirrors our own world. Artificial intelligence, virtual networks, and neural interfaces are no longer science fiction. The moral question has evolved from, will technology destroy us? To, what will we become with it? And that's precisely where Star Trek's latest storylines thrive, turning technological terror into a mirror for our own ethical dilemmas. If the Borg represented a dystopian vision of networked life, then the new Star Trek collectives represent the utopian counterpoint, the hope that connection, rather than conformity, can lead to transcendence. They're emotionally complex, something the Borg never were. Let's be honest, the Borg Queen changed everything. Her introduction in Star Trek First Contact gave the Borg a face, and with it, a hint of personality. But even she couldn't escape the limits of her role. The Borg were still fundamentally emotionless. They could mimic empathy but never truly feel it. The newer collective concepts, however, are emotionally rich in a way the Borg never managed. In Discovery, Zora, the ship's sentient computer, embodies a kind of collective consciousness born from data, memory, and emotion. She feels joy, fear, and compassion. She's what the Borg Queen could never be, an intelligence that loves. This emotional complexity adds depth to the idea of unity. When connection is no longer sterile but deeply personal, it challenges our notions of identity. What happens when two beings share not only thoughts but feelings? When empathy becomes literal rather than metaphorical? That's the kind of philosophical territory Star Trek was made for, and it's something the old Borg could never reach without collapsing their entire premise. In a sense, Star Trek has created the anti-Borg, a collective that proves shared consciousness doesn't have to mean the death of the self. The new collective isn't just a threat, it's a mirror. The Borg were always outsiders. They invaded, assimilated, and terrorized, but they never really reflected who we are at our best. They represented what we feared we might become if we lost control. But the newest version of a collective intelligence in Star Trek isn't something to destroy, it's something to learn from. That's a subtle but profound shift in storytelling. Where Picard saw the Borg as a plague to be purged, today's Starfleet might approach them as an opportunity for understanding. This aligns perfectly with the Federation's founding ideals: exploration, diplomacy, and discovery. It's also deeply in tune with Gene Roddenberry's original vision. Star Trek has never been about destroying the unknown, it's about embracing it. By introducing a version of the Borg that reflects the potential good in collective evolution, the franchise isn't abandoning its legacy. It's fulfilling it. Discovery's progenitor tech, the ultimate evolution of the Borg concept. If we look closely, the ancient progenitor technology in Discovery Season 5 is the culmination of decades of Star Trek storytelling about evolution, creation, and identity. It's not a weapon or a virus, it's the ultimate connective force. The progenitors used it to seed life across the galaxy, implying a fundamental unity among all species. That's the key difference. The Borg tried to force that unity through assimilation. The progenitors achieved it through creation. Imagine what that means for Star Trek's moral landscape. The Borg represented synthetic domination, biological life conquered by machines. The progenitors represent the inverse, biological harmony achieved through choice and technology working in tandem. It's what the Borg could have been if they had evolved instead of corrupted themselves. In that sense, Star Trek's latest collective isn't a replacement for the Borg, it's their spiritual successor. It shows what happens when the dream of connection is achieved ethically, not violently. The philosophical edge, free will versus collective harmony. One of the oldest debates in Star Trek is where individuality ends and unity begins. The Vulcan mind meld, the Trill symbiont bond, even the telepathic links of the Betazoids all explore variations of shared consciousness. But the Borg made that question horrifying. The new collective turns it back into a question of balance. Can individuality and unity coexist? Can we be part of something greater without losing ourselves entirely? Star Trek's modern writers seem to think so. They're exploring what it means to choose connection instead of being,